was a doctoral candidate in history with a mountain of debt and a future he no longer believed in. When he inherited an abandoned farm from a grandmother he barely knew, he thought it was the end of the road. What he discovered buried there wasn't just about the past. It was about whether he had the courage to build a future. If you've ever felt like your story was over before it even began, stick around and hit that subscribe button. Maybe we can figure out the next chapter together. The box was the last thing. Everything else I owned, or rather, everything I hadn't sold for gas money and instant noodles over the past 6 months, was already crammed into the back of my dying hatchback. The box held books. Not the rare primary source texts from the university library I'd spent years hunched over, breathing in the scent of decaying paper and forgotten ideas. But my books. The ones that had been my only real friends since I was a kid. A dog-eared fantasy series. A collection of poetry with a cracked spine. A historical novel about a legionnaire lost in ancient Germany. They felt impossibly heavy, not just with paper and ink, but with the weight of the person I was supposed to have become. Dr. Leo Thorne, a name that now sounded like a cruel joke. I taped the box shut, the screech of the plastic tape echoing in the empty apartment. The sound was final, an exclamation point on a sentence of failure. 2 years of coursework, comprehensive exams passed with distinction, and then the dissertation. The great grinding wall of the dissertation. It wasn't just writer's block. It was a crisis of faith. I was writing about the economic motivations behind 17th century agrarian land disputes. And one day I looked up from a page of mind-numbing tax records and realized I didn't care. Not a single bit. Worse, I couldn't fathom how anyone ever had. The passion had evaporated, leaving behind a dry, dusty basin of obligation. The calls from my advisor became less frequent, his tone shifting from encouragement to concern, then to a weary sort of disappointment that was somehow worse than anger. So I stopped answering. I stopped going to the library. I started delivering pizzas in a town that looked down on its university students, a feeling I was now intimately familiar with from the other side of the counter. My savings dwindled, then vanished. The eviction notice was almost a relief. That's when the call came. I was sitting on the floor of my empty living room, eating cold pizza from the box and scrolling through job listings for warehouse workers, when an unknown number from a rural area code flashed on my screen. I almost ignored it. "Is this Leo Thorne?" a woman's voice asked. It was calm, professional, and held the kind of patient authority that made me immediately feel like a child in the principal's office. I confirmed it was. "My name is Ms. Albright," she said. "I'm an attorney in Stillwater County. I'm calling regarding the estate of Ilara Thorne." My grandmother. The name felt foreign. I hadn't seen her since I was 10, a brief, awkward visit after my parents' funeral. She had been a silhouette of a person to me, a figure defined by absence. She sent a $50 check on my birthday every year, enclosed in a generic card with no personal message, until I turned 18. Then, nothing. I had assumed she was already gone, or had simply forgotten I existed. It turned out I was half right. "I'm sorry to inform you that your grandmother passed away 3 weeks ago," Ms. Albright said, her tone softening fractionally. I murmured something, a hollow platitude of condolence for a woman I couldn't even properly picture. "She named you as her sole beneficiary." I waited. I pictured a small savings account, maybe a few $1,000s that would fix my car and get me a deposit on a new, slightly less depressing apartment. A lifeline. "She left you her property," the lawyer continued. 120 acres, the farmhouse, and 2 barns. It's all yours, free and clear. Well, almost. There it was, the other shoe. "The property taxes haven't been paid in 3 years," she said, and I could hear the faint rustle of papers. "The county has a lien on the place. You have 90 days to settle the debt, or it goes to public auction." The number she quoted was impossible. It was more than my student loans, more than I could ever hope to make in a decade of delivering pizzas. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. "So, she left me a bill?" "She left you a choice," Ms. Albright corrected gently. "The land is worth considerably more than what's owed, even in its current state. A developer, Pioneer Valley Estates, has had a standing offer on it for years. You could sell, pay the taxes, and walk away with a substantial amount of money." Substantial. The word hung in the air, shimmering with possibility. A clean slate, an escape. I could pay off my loans, move somewhere new, and pretend the last 8 years of academic striving and failure had never happened. It was the smart move, the only move. "What's the alternative?" I asked, though I already knew it was a stupid question. "The alternative," she said, a hint of something I couldn't quite decipher in her voice, "is you pay the taxes, and the farm is yours." I looked around the empty room, at the single heavy box of books. I had no home, no job, no future. I had nothing to lose but a debt I already couldn't pay. "Where is it?" I asked. "This farm?" She gave me the address, a rural route number in a town I'd never heard of, a place that sounded less like a destination and more like a direction. "I'm sending you a packet with all the paperwork," she concluded, "including the keys. Your grandmother specified they should be sent to you directly, no matter what." The call ended. I sat in the silence, the echo of the word farm bouncing around the hollow space of my life. It was a ridiculous, romantic, and utterly doomed idea. A place I hadn't seen in nearly 2 decades, left to me by a ghost. But it was a place, and right then, a place was the one thing in the world I didn't have. I stood up, my knees cracking in protest. I picked up the heavy box of books, carried it down to my car, and shoved it onto the passenger seat. I didn't know where I was going, not really. I was just leaving. And for the first time in a long, long time, it felt less like an escape and more like a departure. The bus ride was a slow, rattling journey out of one life and into the theoretical space of another. I'd sold the hatchback for a few $100s, just enough for the ticket and a duffel bag full of necessities. The box of books sat at my feet, a solid, reassuring weight against my ankles. For 2 days, I watched the world transform through the grimy window. The sprawling, interconnected suburbs of the city bled into industrial parks, then into wider, flatter landscapes of organized agriculture. Eventually, even those gave way to something wilder. The roads narrowed, the trees grew thicker, and the houses became fewer and farther between, each one looking less like a home and more like a stubborn outpost against the encroaching wilderness. I was the only person who got off at the stop for Havenwood. It wasn't a town so much as a crossroads with a gas station, a diner with a flickering neon sign, and a post office. The air smelled different here, damp earth, pine needles, and a faint, sweet scent of decay, like wet leaves in autumn. There were no taxis, no Ubers, just a payphone that looked like a relic from another century. Ms. Albright's number was on a crumpled piece of paper in my pocket. When I called, a receptionist told me she was in court, but had left instructions. She said to tell you that old Bill from the hardware store would give you a ride if you asked him. He's expecting you. Old Bill turned out to be a man who looked like he'd been carved from the same ancient timber as the shelves in his store. He had a face full of deep lines, hands like worn leather gloves, and eyes that sized me up in a single, sweeping glance. He didn't smile. "You're the Thorn boy," he said. It wasn't a question. "Heard you were coming." News traveled fast in a place like this. I nodded, feeling like an outsider, a city kid with soft hands and a useless education. "Albright said you'd give me a lift out to the farm." He grunted, a sound that could have meant anything. "Load up." His truck was as old and weathered as he was, the cab smelling of oil, sawdust, and faint, stale coffee. We drove in silence for a few miles, the truck groaning as it climbed a series of winding, poorly maintained roads. The dense forest canopy created a tunnel of green, with sunlight dappling the cracked asphalt. "Your grandmother was a tough woman," Bill said suddenly, his voice raspy. "Kept to herself. Most people around here left her be." I didn't know what to say to that. "I didn't really know her," I admitted. He glanced at me, his expression unreadable. "Maybe, or maybe you just didn't know what you were looking at." He turned onto a gravel road nearly swallowed by overgrown weeds. The tires crunched over the stones, and branches scraped against the sides of the truck like fingernails. After another quarter-mile, he slowed to a stop. "This is it," he said. I looked out the window and my heart sank. It wasn't a farm, it was a ruin. The farmhouse was a skeletal thing, its paint peeled away to reveal the bare, silvered wood beneath. The porch roof sagged in the middle, held up by what looked like sheer memory. Windows were broken, dark eyes in a weathered face. The two barns listed to one side, their great doors hanging crookedly from rusted hinges. Everywhere, nature was staging a patient, relentless siege. Weeds choked the yard. Vines, thick as my arm, snaked up the walls of the house, and a small tree was growing defiantly through the floorboards of the porch. It was a place that had been given up on, a place that had surrendered. "Needs work," Bill stated, the biggest understatement I had ever heard. "Keys are in the packet Albright gave you," he said, not bothering to get out. "Good luck, boy. You're gonna need it." He reversed the truck down the long, narrow driveway and was gone, leaving me in a cloud of dust and an overwhelming, profound silence, broken only by the chirping of insects and the rustle of wind in the tall grass. I was alone, truly, utterly alone. I walked slowly toward the house, my duffel bag slung over my shoulder. The air was thick with the smell of neglect. I found the keys, a set of 3 old iron ones on a simple metal ring. The lock on the front door was stiff with rust, and for a moment I thought it wouldn't turn. Then, with a groan of protest, it gave way. The door swung inward on a single, complaining hinge, opening into darkness. The inside of the house was a time capsule. A thick layer of dust coated every surface, dancing in the narrow shafts of light that pierced the gloom. The furniture was still there, shrouded in white cloths like sleeping ghosts. A grandfather clock stood silent in the corner, its hands frozen at 3:15. In the kitchen, a calendar from 15 years ago was still tacked to the wall, a faded picture of a covered bridge above the grid of a long-forgotten June. It was the home of a person who had stopped living long before her heart stopped beating. I wandered through the rooms, my footsteps echoing in the stillness. It felt like trespassing. This place held no memories for me, only the oppressive sense of a story I would never know. The place was a tomb, and I was its unwelcome inheritor. My plan, vague as it was, had been to camp out for a few days, assess the situation, and then call Ms. Albright to accept the developer's offer. This place confirmed it. It wasn't a home, it was a liability. There was no saving it. It was a place to be bulldozed, erased, and forgotten. That evening, as the sun began to set, casting long, eerie shadows across the overgrown yard, I found myself drawn to the back of the house. Behind a thicket of thorny bushes, I found what must have once been a garden. The outlines of raised beds were still visible, their wooden borders rotted and collapsing. Weeds grew in a dense, tangled mat, but here and there, a few stubborn perennials still bloomed, a patch of resilient irises, a wild, sprawling rosebush. It was the only part of the property that didn't feel completely dead. In a small, dilapidated shed next to the garden, its door hanging off one hinge, I found a collection of rusted tools. A spade with a splintered handle, a hoe, a pair of shears, and a small hand trowel, its metal blade pitted with rust, but its wooden handle smooth and dark from years of use. I picked it up. The wood felt warm, shaped to a hand. On an impulse I didn't understand, I went back to the garden. I wasn't trying to fix it, not really. It was more a gesture of frustration, a need to do something, anything, with the nervous energy coursing through me. I started pulling at the thickest weeds, their roots clinging stubbornly to the dry, packed earth. I hacked at the thorny vines with the dull spade. It was pointless, exhausting work. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and orange. My hands were raw, my back ached, and I had cleared a patch no bigger than a welcome mat. I was about to give up when the tip of the trowel struck something hard with a dull, metallic thud. I thought it was a rock and dug around it, annoyed. But it wasn't a rock. It was flat, with straight edges. My curiosity piqued. I dug more carefully, scraping away the dirt. It was a box. A metal cash box, the kind people used to keep important papers in decades ago. It was heavy, sealed shut by years of rust and damp earth. I carried it back to the porch as dusk settled into night, my heart pounding with a strange mixture of excitement and dread. It took me 20 minutes of prying with the end of the spade and a rock, but finally the rusted latch gave way with a screech of protest. I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of yellowed cheesecloth, was not money, not jewelry, not a deed. It was a book, a simple, leather-bound journal, its cover warped and stained by